All right. So last week we finished discussing the idea of these five divisions. We said we had four listed in one place in the Talmud. We had three in the other place. We combined the list and got five. Tzadik v'tovlo, Tzadik v'ralo, Beinoni from that other source, Rasha v'tovlo, Rasha v'ralo. And we described them according to the Talmud's definition. Tzaddik v'tovlo, the tzaddik, and it's good for him. The Talmud defines tzaddik gamor, complete tzaddik. Tzaddik v'ralo, the tzaddik, and it's bad for him. The Talmud defines tzaddik she'eno gamor, incomplete tzaddik. And from that, we understood all five, what it means on the side of the Talmud in terms of describing the physical reality, because the spiritual creates the physical, and we discussed it at length. And then we went to the side of Tanya, of Hasidus, of Kabbalah, as we saw in the Zohar and the Raya Mehemna, that these five terms are actually describing the inner spiritual reality of these people. And then we said, wow, it's possible that the Rasha v'Toivlo on the side of the Hasidus, the inner dimension, is greater than the complete tzaddik on the side of the Talmud. Seems like two totally different worlds. But we said it's not two totally different worlds at all. It's really one Torah, body and soul, one unit, body and soul. And we're going to give ourselves many chapters until we'll understand how what the Talmud's saying, the revealed dimension of Torah, and how what the Tanya is saying, the inner dimension of Torah, is actually one Torah, and it all works together. All right, so now let us continue. We're going to go back to our text that we haven't looked at for a while. So we are in chapter 1. What the Rebbe wants to show us, if you can remember, the overarching concept is, you don't know what these terms mean. You don't know what tzaddik means. You don't know what Rasha means. And therefore, if you don't know what tzaddik, the good guy, the holy guy, means, and you don't know what Rasha, the evil guy, means, well, surely the one in the middle, Beinoni, who's in the middle between the two, you don't know what that means either. That's the Rebbe's goal. Because if you remember, people are walking in to study the Tanya with preconceptions, with somewhat erroneous preconceptions on what it means to be a tzaddik, more good than evil, what it means to be a Rasha, more evil than good, and what it means to be a Beinoni. Well, you're like right in the middle, 50-50. And the Rebbe wants to show you, not just that is incorrect from the spiritual dimension. The Rebbe wants to show you that that's not what the Talmud feels about these terms. So what the Rebbe is now going to do is give us 7 different sources from the Talmud for us to understand that we're misunderstanding these terms. And once we can chuck out the old, we can bring in the new and understand what these terms really mean. Why do I care so much? It's terms. But what am I spending so much time on terms for? Because it's not terms. It's potential. It's who we are. Meaning, as the Alter Rebbe postulates and says very strongly in Tanya, every Jew has the potential to be the Beinoni of Tanya. Well, what does that mean? Well, we don't know yet. But when we could really understand what it means to be a Beinoni and say, this is me in potential. This is who I can be. This is what I need to actualize. This is what I could become in terms of this beautifully transparent to God human being. That's the reality of every Jew. Now, the Rebbe in our generation has updated this dramatically, raised the bar very much, because in our generation, since we're so close to the complete revelation of Mashiach, or to put it in different terms, since the complete revelation of Mashiach is very, very overdue, there's so much energy of Mashiach in the world. The Rebbe says all the energy of Mashiach is already in the world. From a spiritual perspective, Mashiach is here. Well, we're human beings and we're very physical human beings. So we need a physical reality of Mashiach. But from a spiritual perspective, all the energy of Mashiach is here. So what do I care? So it makes us different people. It makes the world a different world. And one of the ways it makes us different is, the Rebbe says, that now our potential has changed. It's not like classical Tanya 200 years ago, that unbelievably enough, every Jew has the potential to be the Beinoni of Tanya, which is quite high. The Rebbe says today, every Jew has the potential to be the complete tzaddik of Tanya. So the more we understand these terms, the more we understand ourselves. And we're going to spend a lot of time in Tanya talking about understanding our soul and understanding God. And the more we understand God, the more we understand ourselves. And the more we understand ourselves, the more we understand God. And when we have a more fleshed out understanding of God, He's so much more real. It's not a term, a concept, a label, a word. It's meaningful. There's a lot of layers and layers of meaning to God. And the more there's that meaning, the more we can have the relationship. And in the end, what Tanya is about is that personal relationship between me and God. And the more God is real and fuller and fuller and fuller in my understanding, the more my relationship is natural, and the more the love and fear and awe naturally flow. 12 lines from the top of the page, third word. Ubegemara, Sof Parates de Brachos, and the Talmud, the end of the 9th chapter of Brachos. Tzadikim Yetzer Tov Shoftan. The tzadikim, now we're not discriminating tzaddik b'tov or tzaddik b'ra, we're just saying this is actually the source for the 3 categories of tzaddik, Benoni, and Rasha. So tzadikim, their good inclination judges them. Risham Yetzer Hara Shoftan. The evil people, their bad inclination judges them. Beinonim zev v'zeh shoftan b'chulei. And the Beinonim, this and this judges in the middle. So this quote from the end of the 9th chapter of Brachos sounds really to be saying exactly what I thought all along. You know, Tzaddik's the good guy, and the Rasha is the bad guy, and the Benoni is the in the middle guy, right? I mean, that's what it says. Tzaddik, the good judges, the Rasha, the bad judges, the Benoni, this and this judges. Nothing here is saying a Benoni is perfect. Nothing here is saying anything like that. Actually, as we'll find when we come to about chapter 13 of Tanya, that this quote from the Talmud is exactly the quote we dissect and see means exactly what Tanya says it means. So right now, we don't know much. And we don't understand this quote. We think we understand it. Little knowledge is dangerous. But in the end, give ourselves at our pace quite a long time. We will come to understand in chapter 13 that this quote from the Talmud, the source of our misunderstanding what the Talmud thinks that Tzaddik, Benoni, and Rasha are, actually is saying in the Talmud, in the body of Torah, exactly what the soul of Torah explains. And because of that, and because the great sages understood all that, we have this otherwise very perplexing statement in the same Talmud. Meaning, the Rebbe wants to show you that it's wrong, it's erroneous, it's a misunderstanding. Tzaddik, good guy, Rasha, bad guy, Benoni, in the middle guy. No. Well, isn't that what it says in the Talmud? Did I not just read you that quote from Talmud, the end of the 9th chapter of Brachos? So now the Rebbe is bringing 7 proofs from the Talmud that that's not what the Talmud thinks. Of course, well, the Rebbe could bring proofs from Zohar. Yeah, but that wouldn't help. Then you'd say, okay, well, I understand. There's 2 Torahs. There's a legalistic, revealed Torah of the Talmud. They have one definition. And then there's the inner spiritual, Kabbalistic. And that looks at these things differently. Everyone's saying, no, it's all one Torah. And in that Talmud that you think is defining the tzaddik as good and the Rasha as bad and the Benoni is in the middle, that Talmud knows the Benoni is absolutely perfect. And now we're going to prove it in 7 ways. First proof, Amar Rabbah. Rabbah, who was one of the greatest lights of the Talmud and the leader of his generation, the spiritual, most holy soul of his generation, said, Kigon on a Benoni. You want to know what a Benoni is? He's obviously teaching these concepts to his students. He says, you want to know what a Benoni is? Look at me. Kigon on a Benoni. I'm an example of a Benoni. Rabbah was the greatest Jew at that time alive. He was what we call the Tzaddik Yesod Olam. The Tzaddik who is the foundation of the world, and his righteousness, the entire world merits existence. In his righteousness, the entire world is protected. There's always that one tzaddik. Remember, as we said last week, it's sort of like a pyramid. So you come to the top, to the pointy point of that pyramid, it's one. That one tzaddik who is the spiritual leader of the generation, right? Like we say, the term Rebbe is an acronym for Rosh B'nai Yisrael, the head, the guiding force, the directing force of the entire body of the Jewish people. Tzaddik Yesod Olam, the tzaddik who is the foundation of the world, who the world continues to exist in his merit. So Rabbah was undisputedly, according to all the people at that time, the spiritual leader of the generation. He is teaching his students. You want to know what a tzaddik is? You want to know what a Beinoni is? You want to know what Rosh is? Keep going on to Beinoni. I'm an example of a Beinoni. Amar le Abaya. So Abaya, his nephew, and one of his foremost students, said to him, Lo shavik mar chaya l'chol biryah. You're not leaving life for any creation. Meaning, Abaya said, my master, my uncle, Rabbah, if you're a Beinoni, we got a lot of problems. We're dead. Why are we dead? Well, for two reasons. One reason is, if you're a Beinoni, then what are we? We're lower than you. You're the greatest soul on this planet. So if you're a Beinoni, then we must be Rishaim. We must be evil people. And we know the Talmud says, Rishaim, af b'chayeim kruyim mesim. The Rishaim, even as they are seemingly alive, they're really dead. They're the walking dead. Their godliness has departed them. They're husks. They're shards. They're evil. Godliness is life. They're death. So if you're a Beinoni, we're all lower than you. We're the Rishaim. We're the walking dead. You don't leave life for the living. And you're the greatest soul of all times. The greatest person alive in this generation. If you're a Beinoni, that means there's no one holier than you. This is a generation without a tzaddik. If this is a generation without a tzaddik, well, as we just said, tzaddik yesod olam. The tzaddik is the foundation of the world. If you're not a tzaddik and you're a Beinoni, the world does not have a tzaddik, this world is going to cease to exist. We're all going to die. So either way you explain it, and you can use both explanations, this makes no sense. Now, we could say this really doesn't seem to make any sense, because Rabbah was very sincere in what he was saying. He was trying to teach his students a concept. You could say, well, he was being modest, but he's a teacher. When you teach, you have to be precise. You have to be accurate. So when he was telling his students, who would go on to become the spiritual leaders and guides and lights and sources of Torah of the next generation, when he was telling them, could go on a Beinoni, like I'm an example of a Beinoni, he wanted them to understand that is true. He wanted them to understand the concept. So what was he thinking? I mean, on the side of the Talmud, where seemingly we thought a Beinoni is right, the tzaddikim, they're the good guys. Their good inclination judges them. They do a lot of good. The Rishaim, the evil people, they're the bad guys. Their evil inclination judges them. They do a lot of bad. And the Beinoni's in the middle. He's like 50-50. If Rabbah was a Beinoni, Abai is saying this world has a problem. Well, guess what? Rabbah was not a Beinoni. Rabbah was a tzaddik. He was a perfect tzaddik. He was a tzaddik v'tovlo on the side of the inner dimension of Torah. He was a tzaddik gamor, complete tzaddik on the side of the inner dimension of the Torah. He had no evil left. He was the tzaddik yesod olam. He was the foundation of the entire world. So what was he thinking? He was thinking, oops, I must sin 50% of the time. I'm just like not aware when I'm sinning. Remember, on the inner dimension, this pure tzaddik has no evil inside of him, has destroyed his evil inclination. His animal soul is serving God, serves God perfectly in everything he does, in everything he says, in everything he thinks, in everything he feels. So how could a person honestly, sincerely think he's sinning 50% of the time and be as perfect as I'm describing? Well, obviously you can't. So obviously, and that's why the Alter Rebbe writes this first, this is such a strong proof that a Beinoni does not mean someone who's sinning 50% of the time. Because there's no way Rabbah, in trying to teach the Beinoni, giving himself as an example, sort of thinks he's sinning 50% of the time. He just happens to miss each time, slips under his radar. But we could really probe a little further and say, Well, even according to the inner dimension of Torah, this doesn't seem to make any sense. Because we said that spiritually speaking, there's a very big difference between the complete tzaddik, the incomplete tzaddik, and the Beinoni. Remember, we said the complete tzaddik, the tzaddik v'tovlo, the tzaddik gamor. He, as we said, destroyed his evil, and his animal soul is helping him serve Hashem, and he never is tempted, and he's constantly utilizing the energy of the animal, and he's racing toward God. And then a very different reality for the incomplete tzaddik, the tzaddik viralo, where he's got no evil bothering him, but he also has no animal soul helping him. And a very different reality for the Beinoni, who, as we said, has a healthy evil inclination, has a healthy animal soul. They bother him all day long, but he always controls himself with the help of God. So those three personas are very different. Never mind on the side of the Talmud where we're saying, well, this clearly makes no sense, and that's why it's such a great proof that a Beinoni is not 50-50. But even on the side of Zohar, of Kabbalah, of Hasidus, of Tanya, it also doesn't seem to make sense. Because if he was the greatest soul of his time, the tzaddik yisod olam, and he was, if he was a tzaddik gamor, complete tzaddik, and he was, well, that reality means he's completely perfect, to the degree that he has no evil, to the degree that his animal soul is helping him serve Hashem. That doesn't really sound like how we define the Beinoni on the side of the Tanya, on the side of Zohar, on the side of Kabbalah. It still seems very different. So that's a great question. I'm glad you thought about it, or if you didn't, now you are. And we will get to answer that. The Alter Rebbe will answer this later in Tanya. For now, we'll just leave it that there are many, many, many levels of Beinonim. When we speak of the Beinoni, again, of course, all of these things have many levels because we're talking about 5 strata, and there's like 15 million Jews in the world today. And most of them are not the 2 levels of tzaddikim or that, last level of Russia. So there's a lot of nuances in Beinoni. There's a lot of levels in incomplete Russia. There's a lot of levels in incomplete tzaddik. There's lots and lots of levels. And when we're talking about a Beinoni as someone who is constantly struggling, but always wins with the help of God, never sins, not in his thought, not in his speech, not in his deed, but he's always tempted, that's the garden variety Beinoni. That's the most common Beinoni. Again, think of the Beinoni as a pyramid, right? We keep speaking about pyramids here. Think of the Beinoni as the pyramid. There's lots and lots and lots of levels and levels of Beinoni. Once the Alter Rebbe said about himself, could go on a Beinoni. Like, I'm a Beinoni, quoting from the Talmud, from Rabbah. And a follower said to the Alter Rebbe, you're a Beinoni? Like the Rebbe's, as we're saying, like Rabbah, the tzaddik, a perfect tzaddik, the greatest tzaddik of his times, the tzaddik yisod olam, you're a Beinoni? And the Alter Rebbe said there are 500 levels of Beinonim. Now in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe does not teach us 500 levels of Beinonim. He teaches us about 20. We learn about 20 levels of Beinonim in Tanya. And obviously there's higher because the Alter Rebbe says there's 500 and he knows what he's talking about. But just as a little thing in the back of your brain, how could Rabbah say he was a Beinoni on the side of Chassidus either? As we'll learn as we go through the Tanya, yes, there's the Beinonim that struggle and overcome and struggle and overcome. And there are even the Beinonim that do not struggle at all. The Beinonim that are that close to the tzaddik that you actually could make a mistake and blur the line between the two. With, of course, a healthy dose of modesty to make things make sense. All right, I spoke a lot straight. Anyone have any questions on anything I've said so far?
I just paid attention when you say tzaddik yesod olam. I never really paid attention to the yesod, which means it's the basic. It's like, it's not only rosh, but it's the base of all of us, which is really amazing. Never paid attention to it.
Yes. And when we're discussing it now, that's exactly the point we're bringing out. The yesod as the foundation, as the strength on which all of us rest. We're all resting on the strength of the tzaddik. Absolutely. Absolutely. And in every generation, there has to be one. And we're told if there's not, the world can't exist. It's actually interesting. This is Parshas Kiseitze. We had this in last week's Devar Malchus, the Rebbe's talk from 1991, where the Rebbe compares the tzaddik the ultimate tzaddik, the tzaddik yisod olam, to what's called the Even HaShasiyah. The Even HaShasiyah is explained as the foundation stone from which the world came into being. And that massive rock from which God brought the world into being would stay permanently in the Holy of Holies, in the Kodesh Kodashim, in the temple. It was there in the first temple. And even in the second temple, when there was like nothing there because it was all hidden in the underground tunnels, it was there as well. And the Rebbe explains that that foundation stone can never be hidden because it always has to be a permanent sign of God's presence in the world. And the Rebbe says that just as that Even HaShasiyah is the permanent sign in a physical way to our physical eyes, this stone, this rock, is a sign, is a symbol of God's presence in the world. God created the world from this energy. So too, that tzaddik, the tzaddik yisod olam, the foundation tzaddik, he also always has to be around and always has to be visible and can never be hidden as the permanent sign of God in this world. Anyone else? Any other thoughts or questions on anything I said so far?
I kind of like the fact that you started out by expressing that our reason we need to analyze and understand the different categories is to develop relationship with Hashem. That's our goal, and that's the main thing. But that's very appropriate for being an Elul. Like that's what we need to be working on. So it seemed like, oh, okay, we're focused on that relationship.
I was actually also thinking about something I said tonight. I don't remember what it was. I was thinking, oh, this is such an appropriate Elul thought. It was something, somehow in my head, it had something to do with tshuva. I don't know what I said tonight that had to do with tshuva, but I know as I was saying it, I was thinking of the Elul connection, but I didn't go there. But yeah, it makes sense. You know, all of Torah, it's like all one organism. It's all one entity. And every part strengthens every other part. So when we're in Elul, which is of course the time of getting closer to Hashem, ani l'doidi v'doidi li, we turn to God and God responds. Our love echoes and pulls down God's even stronger love for us. So when we're in Elul and we're learning Tanya, it's so like strong, this reality of this is all about love, reflecting love, reflecting love, reflecting love. And that's what we're doing. Thank you for saying it. I thought about it, not in connection to what you're saying, something else, and I did not say it. Thank you for saying it. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on any of this? Okay. So we just went through the first, remember I said there's 7, the first proof that a Benoni is not 50-50. A Benoni must be so high and so holy because Rabbah thought he was a Benoni. And again, like, what do I care? I'm not here to learn Talmud. I'm not here to focus on definitions. I care because the Benoni is me. Because every one of us are at least potentially that Benoni of Tanya. And of course, as we're saying, the Rebbe says, no, you should already be the tzaddik of Tanya. But for sure, the Benoni. So this is who I am, not a 50-50 a Benoni, like only half the time you sin and half the time you're good. No, the Rebbe says, you're a Jew. You're a piece of God. You're a shining reflection of God's light. You're a shining transfer of God. 50% of the time, you think you're doing something wrong? It's not a Benoni. That's not who you are. So that was the first way to just chisel away at people that are like so fixated. Well, a Benoni is 50% of the time right and 50% of the time wrong, and that's who we are. We're 50% of the time sinners. No, Abba thought he was a Benoni, and Rabbah, he was the most perfect person in his generation. Now we're going to give the second proof. These first 2 are more complex, and the other 5 go a lot faster. To understand this all very well. And to understand what Job said, Baba Basra Parak Aleph, in Baba Basra, also in the Talmud, it's quoting the conversation Eov had with God. Rabbeinu Shalayla, Master of the world, Barasa Tzadikim, you created the righteous, Barasa Rasha'im Chule, and you created the wicked. On those words of Eov, on those words of Job, the Talmud comments, the sages of the Talmud say, huh? Tzaddik v'rasha lo ka'amar. What's Job talking about? Tzaddik and Rasha are not stated. So let me give you a little background. I don't know if you do or don't know the story of Job, to understand what this proof is talking about and why it is also, like the proof from Rabbah, a very strong proof of the Alter Rebbe's point that a Benoni is not 50-50. We don't understand what a Benoni is. We don't understand what a tzaddik is. We don't understand what a rush is. Let's understand, because we want to understand ourselves. So Job there's different understandings in the Talmud about Job. Some say it's a story. It's a parable. There never was such a human being. It's a story written to bring out a very strong moral point. Others say no, he was a real person and he lived around the same time as Abraham. Others say no, he was a real person and he lived during the time we call from like the Exodus of Egypt, meaning he actually passed away before the Jews should have entered Israel, meaning about a year after the Exodus. So he lived during that time, and at some point, about a year after the Exodus, he passed away. So either in the times of Abraham, or 7 generations later in the times of the Exodus, or he actually never lived. It's a very strong parable. In any case, what's written, which happened to this person, or as a parable, Job is a very righteous person, obviously not Jewish person, very, very righteous, God-fearing person, who's very, very strong in his relationship to God. And the forces of evil say to God, well, what's so special about Job? Oh, he's so good, he's so godly, he's so righteous. Yeah, look what you gave him. Perfect health, very wealthy, many sons, I think he had like 10. And yeah, he serves you, big deal. Take it all away and let's see how he'll be. And God said, okay. And all of his sons passed away. He lost all of his money. And he came down with this contagious, horrific disease. So when people were coming to comfort him for his loss, they couldn't even sit close to him because of his disease. So boom, 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 he lost everything. And the work of Job, which obviously is a tragic concept, and it's actually something that's so sad, you're allowed to learn it on the 9th of Av, which in general we don't learn Torah because Torah brings us joy. And we're only allowed to learn the very sad parts of Torah, like the book of Job. So for the bulk of the work, he has friends come, I believe 3 different friends that come and try to comfort him. And he's not comforted. He said, no, I don't accept. I'm not comforted. And then at the end of the book, God talks to him. And he said, for this opportunity, to be able to talk like this to God, to have this relationship with God, I'm comforted. I accept all of my losses. I'm comforted because of this new closeness I have with God, that he's coming and talking to me to give me comfort. When Job said this, he passed the test because he showed that truly all he cared about was God. Even when he lost everything, all he cared about was God. And therefore he passed the test and he was cured and he regained his wealth and he had more children. And that is the end of the book. Within this chapter of God's conversation with Job, Job is talking to God. They're talking, the 2 of them are talking. So Job says to God, God, you created the tzaddikim. You created the Rishaim. That's what Job says to God. Now here's God, like, so to speak, in the spotlight. Job is talking to him. And God doesn't say, you got it wrong, Job. I never did that. Which means God agrees, right? We say silence is acquiescence. If I say something and no one contradicts me, no one argues with me, no one disagrees with me, that means you all agree I'm right. So when Job says to God, you, God, created the tzaddikim. You, God, created the Rishaim. God doesn't say no, so God's agreeing. So the Talmud says, well, that's strange. Why is that strange? Because the one thing that is not stated is, are we going to be good or bad? What do they mean by this? Well, there's a famous saying of our sages, Hakol biyadei shamayim chutz miyiras shamayim. Everything is in the hand of heaven except fear of heaven. Meaning many things, most things, in our life are stated. Determinism, determined by God. How long we'll live, how many seconds we'll have on planet Earth, God determined. Health or the absence, God determined. Wealth or the absence, God determined. The number of children we'll have, God determined. Our life is very determined by God. Where we're going to live, our career choices, who we're going to marry. No, I chose all that. We think we chose. All determined by God. So we have no choice. We have tremendous choice. We have choice in how we respond to the events that God gives us. In other words, we have choice to be good or bad. God's dishing out life to us. But how am I going to respond to the life that he gives? Am I going to take that life and use it as a vehicle to serve God? Am I going to take that life and turn my back to God? Or worse? That's my choice, and that's my only choice. When we say we have free choice is actually a hard concept to understand. Like chapter 24 of Tanya, we will explore it somewhat. And the more you understand Hashgacha Pratis, God's divine hand in every molecule of creation, God's divine orchestration of every blade of grass, the more perplexing and confusing is this concept of free choice. Because if God is determining where the leaf falls and how the wind rustles, then what am I choosing already? How could I choose anything when God's, even on the most tiny, seemingly insignificant levels, God's plotting it all out? I mean, what difference does it make to God if this blade of grass grows or not? If this leaf rustles in the wind or not? If this ant scurries here or there? Everything makes a difference. Everything inanimate, every vegetation, every level of animal life, every human, and how much more so every Jew makes a difference. So if my life is so plotted out by God, where's my free choice? My free choice is in the arena of my service. Anything that has to do with my service of God, I do have free choice. Anything that does not have to do with my service of God, I have no choice, and it's all determined by God. So therefore, the Talmud says, what's going on? Job is saying, God, you created the tzaddik, you created the rasha. But we know the one thing God doesn't create is if we're going to be good or bad. God creates everything else, but not if we're going to be good or bad. That's our choice. So what did Job mean? Well, obviously, Job said this knowing that tzaddik does not mean good, and rasha does not mean bad. If tzaddik meant good and rasha meant bad, if we could transpose those words to Job's statement, God, you created the good people and you created the bad people, chas v'shalom. This is the only thing we choose. This is why we're not, rats in the laboratory testing ground. This is why we're human beings, why we're Jews. This is why our good and our bad are meaningful, are impactful. Everything good we do raises God, changes the reality of the world. Everything bad we do can hover forever, bringing evil to the world. Because our good and bad is very real, because that's what we are choosing. That's not dictated and scripted. So what did Eve mean? Eve meant exactly what he said. God, you created the tzaddik. God, you created the rasha. And that's true, and that's legit. And that does not mean you created good people or bad people, because good or bad people choose. But tzaddik doesn't mean good. And rasha doesn't mean bad. To understand what Job really meant, got to hang on for a lot of chapters. One of the last questions from chapter 1 that the Alter Rebbe resolves is, what did Job mean by you created the wicked? That's in the 20s already. That's a long time away. But we will get there, and we will understand at a certain point, end of chapter 14, what did Job mean? You created the tzaddik, not the good guy. God doesn't create us if we're good or bad. That's our choice. What did Job mean? And God agreed with him because he didn't contradict him by you created the tzaddik. And in like 27 maybe, what did Job mean by you created the rasha? We will get there. But for now, from the construct of chapter 1, it's an awesome proof that tzaddik doesn't mean good and rasha doesn't mean bad. And if the tzaddik's not good and the rasha's not bad, guess what? You, potential Benoni, you're not 50-50 either. The Rebbe has 7 proofs. Don't we understand by now? Can we not accept by now that a tzaddik doesn't mean good and a rasha doesn't mean bad and a beiner doesn't mean 50-50? We would accept by now. We're believers. We're fans. We're supporters. We're the choir you preach to. We totally accept. But the Alter Rebbe understands he's not only writing for people like us. And therefore the Alter Rebbe wants to so conclusively, so fundamentally establish that the tzaddik's not good and the rasha's not bad and the beini's not 50-50, that we are not stopping here. And the Rebbe gives us 5 more proofs from the Talmud that the Talmud knows that the tzaddik's not good and the rasha's not bad and the beini is not 50-50.
You want maybe to recap?
1, the proof from Rabbah, that if Rabbah can say he's a Benoni, and Rabbah was the spiritual leader of the generation who never sinned, then obviously a Benoni can't be sinning 50% of the time. So obviously we're misunderstanding the term Benoni. And if we're misunderstanding Benoni, we're probably also misunderstanding the tzaddik and rasha. And the proof from Eov, from Job, that if Job can say that God creates the tzaddik and God creates the rasha, but we know God doesn't create our goodness or our evil. That's man's choice. That means tzaddik isn't good and rasha isn't evil. It must mean something else. So those are the 2 proofs we have so far. And God willing, next week, we'll go through 5 more proofs from the Talmud, much shorter proofs, but all bringing out the same point, that we don't understand the term tzaddik, we don't understand the term Benoni, we don't understand the term rasha. And once we can clear our heads of all of the things we don't understand, we can be open to what these terms really mean, which again means who we really are.